What happens when one of America's most respected news anchors decides he's had enough of carefully crafted royal narratives and polished PR responses? What happens when years of diplomatic journalism suddenly give way to the kind of raw, unfiltered questioning that leaves a duchess speechless on live television? Well, you're about to find out. Because what unfolded on Good Morning America wasn't just an interview. It was a masterclass in journalistic integrity that left viewers across the nation picking their jaws up off the floor. If you think you've seen heated television before, you haven't seen anything yet. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about what's coming, because this is going to be one wild ride. George Stephanopoulos sat across from Meghan Markle in the pristine Good Morning America studio. The morning light streaming through the windows, creating what should have been a picture-perfect interview setup. The cameras were rolling. Millions of viewers were tuned in. And what started as a routine promotional appearance was about to become something entirely different. George had his notes prepared, his questions lined up. But something in his demeanor suggested this wasn't going to be the softball interview everyone expected. "Meghan, thank you for joining us this morning," George began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone that had made him a household name. "I want to start with something that I think our viewers are really curious about. You've spoken extensively about your experiences, your struggles, your truth, as you call it. But I have to ask, when you look back at some of the statements you've made, particularly about certain members of the royal family, do you ever question whether your perspective might have been, shall we say, influenced by the emotional state you were in at the time?" Meghan's smile faltered slightly, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the flash of surprise that crossed her face. This wasn't the gentle warm-up question she had been expecting. "I'm sorry, George, but I'm not sure what you're implying. My truth is my truth, and I've been very careful to only speak about my lived experiences." George leaned forward slightly, his pen tapping against his notepad in a rhythm that seemed almost calculated. "Your lived experiences, yes, but lived experiences can sometimes be subjective, can't they? I mean, we've all been in situations where our emotions, our stress levels, our mental state at the time might color how we remember events. I'm wondering if you've ever considered that possibility when it comes to some of the more serious allegations you've made." The studio seemed to grow quieter, if that was even possible. Meghan's posture straightened, her hands clasping together in her lap with just a bit more tension than before. "George, I think what you're doing here is exactly the kind of gasp that I experienced within the institution. You're suggesting that my memories, my experiences of racism, of being silenced, of having my mental health concerns dismissed, that somehow these are just products of an emotional state rather than real events that happened to me." "I'm not gaslighting anyone, Meghan," George replied, his voice remaining steady, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "I'm asking the questions that I think responsible journalism requires. You've made some very serious accusations. Accusations that have had real consequences for real people. The public has a right to understand the foundation of those accusations. So, let me be more direct. When you spoke about concerns being raised about Archie's skin color, you never named the person who allegedly made those comments. You let speculation run wild. You let an entire family be painted with a brush of racism while conveniently maintaining plausible deniability by not providing specifics. How is that fair?" Meghan's eyes flashed, her composure beginning to crack in a way that viewers had rarely seen before. "Excuse me, are you seriously sitting here suggesting that I should have named someone and potentially destroyed their life over a private conversation? I was trying to be protective. I was trying to handle this with some level of dignity." "Protective of whom, exactly?" George shot back, his journalist instincts now fully engaged. "Because from where I sit, it seems like you were protective of your own narrative while being remarkably unprotective of the institution you married into, the family you became part of, and the country that welcomed you. You can't make allegations that serious and then hide behind the excuse of being protective when people ask for accountability." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators found themselves leaning in slightly, the usually bustling background of a morning show grinding to a halt as staff members realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan's media training was clearly kicking in as she attempted to regain control of the situation. "George, I think you're mischaracterizing what happened. I was asked a direct question in that interview, and I answered it honestly. I didn't set out to hurt anyone, but I also wasn't going to lie about my experiences just to protect an institution that had failed to protect me." George's laugh was brief and humorless. "Failed to protect you. Meghan, you were given a platform, a title, resources, staff, security, and a global stage. You were welcomed into one of the most privileged positions on earth. And when things didn't go exactly the way you wanted them to go, when you discovered that royal life came with rules and restrictions that applied to everyone, not just you, your response was to burn it all down on international television. Exactly how did they fail to protect you? You're oversimplifying something incredibly complex, Meghan replied, her voice rising slightly. You have no idea what it was like to be inside that system, to have every aspect of your life controlled, to be told that you can't defend yourself when lies are being printed about you daily, to have your own family, your husband's family, refuse to correct false narratives that were destroying your reputation. George set his pen down and looked directly into the camera before turning back to Meghan. Let's talk about those false narratives, shall we? Because I've done my homework here, and I think our viewers deserve to know some facts. You've claimed that you had no idea what royal life would be like, that you weren't prepared, that no one helped you understand the protocols and expectations. But you dated Harry for 2 years before your engagement was announced. You had access to the internet, to books, 2 decades of documentation about what royal life entailed. Are you really asking us to believe that you went into this completely blind? Meghan's face was now noticeably flushed, her hands fidgeting with her bracelet as she searched for a response. Research and lived experience are 2 completely different things. George, you can read all you want about something, but until you're actually living it, until you're the one being scrutinized and criticized for everything from how you hold a coffee cup to how you close a car door, you have no idea what the reality is like. Fair enough, George nodded. But his expression suggested he wasn't done. But let's examine some of the specific claims you've made. You said that Kate made you cry before your wedding, a story that painted her in a very negative light publicly. Then later you admitted that actually you had made Kate cry, and that she had apologized and brought you flowers. So which version should the public believe? And more importantly, why did you allow the first version, the false version, to damage Kate's reputation for so long before setting the record straight? The silence that followed George's question about the Kate crying incident stretched for what felt like an eternity in television time. Meghan's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if the words she wanted to say were stuck somewhere. Between her thoughts and her voice, the seasoned interviewer had clearly struck a nerve, and he wasn't about to let her off the hook. I'm waiting for an answer, Meghan, George said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years spent holding powerful people accountable. You allowed your sister-in-law to be vilified in the press for months, maybe years, over something that you knew wasn't true. That's not just misleading, that's cruel. Meghan's composure finally cracked visibly. You don't understand the position I was in. Everything was so overwhelming. The wedding planning, the media scrutiny, the pressure to be perfect when that story came out. I was trying to protect the privacy of what was a private moment between Kate and me. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. But you did hurt someone, George pressed on relentlessly. You hurt Kate. You hurt the monarchy's reputation, and you hurt your own credibility and the way you revealed the truth almost as an afterthought. In another interview, it felt calculated. It felt like you were controlling the narrative, releasing information when it served your purposes rather than when it served the truth. The camera caught Meghan's hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. That's not fair, George. You're painting me as some kind of manipulative person when I was just trying to survive an impossible situation. Every single thing I did was scrutinized. Every word was twisted. Every gesture was analyzed for hidden meaning. I was damned if I did and damned if I didn't. George leaned back in his chair, but his gaze never left her face. Let's talk about survival then, because I want to understand something. You've spoken about feeling suicidal, about reaching out for help and being told that seeking mental health treatment would be bad for the institution. That's a serious allegation. But here's what I don't understand. You had resources. You had money. You had a husband who loved you. Why didn't you just go get help anyway? Why did you need permission from an institution to take care of your mental health? Meghan's eyes flashed with anger now, any pretense of diplomatic politeness evaporating. Because you don't understand how that family works. You don't just do things without approval. Everything has to go through proper channels. Everything has to be vetted. Everything has to be approved by people who are more concerned about headlines than they are about human beings. So, you're saying you chose to suffer rather than risk upsetting the establishment. George's voice carried a note of incredulity. You chose to put your mental health, potentially your life, at risk rather than just walk into a therapist's office. That doesn't sound like the strong, independent woman you've portrayed yourself to be in other contexts. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as Meghan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You're oversimplifying something incredibly complex. When you're in that system, when you're part of that machine, you lose yourself. You lose your agency. You become so dependent on their approval, their guidance, their protection that you forget you have other options. George nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. And yet, when it came to other decisions, you seemed to have no problem acting independently. You continued working with your patronages despite reported guidance to step back. You maintained relationships with friends they allegedly disapproved of. You wore outfits that reportedly went against protocol. So clearly you were capable of independent action when it suited you. Those are completely different situations, Meghan shot back, her voice rising in frustration. Supporting charities and choosing my own friends are hardly the same as seeking mental health treatment. One affects the monarchy's image. The other affects my personal well-being. But that's exactly my point, George said, his voice growing stronger. You made choices based on what you wanted to do when it came to smaller things. But you claim you had no choice when it came to something as important as your mental health. It sounds like you're picking and choosing when to play the victim and when to play the independent woman. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions, shock, anger, indignation, before settling into something harder, more defensive than anything viewers had seen from her before. "How dare you?" she said quietly, but with unmistakable venom. "How dare you sit there and question my mental health struggles? You have no idea what it's like to be so broken, so lost that you can't see a way forward. You have no idea what it's like to feel trapped in a system that views you as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be supported." George didn't flinch. "You're right. I don't know what that feels like, but I do know what accountability looks like. And I know what responsibility looks like. And what I'm seeing here is someone who has made a career out of playing the victim while simultaneously wielding enormous influence and power. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. A career out of playing the victim." Meghan's voice was incredulous. "Now, I left everything behind. I gave up my career, my independence, my life in America, my friends, my family relationships. I sacrificed everything to try to make that marriage and that role work. And when it became clear that it was destroying me, I made the incredibly difficult decision to leave. How is that playing the victim?" George picked up his pen again, tapping it against his notepad in that same calculated rhythm. "You left, yes, but you didn't leave quietly. You didn't leave with dignity or discretion. You left with a series of explosive interviews, a Netflix deal, a book deal, and a campaign to completely rewrite the narrative of your time in the royal family. You turned your departure into a business opportunity and a public relations campaign. That doesn't sound like someone who just wanted to quietly rebuild their life." The camera operators were now capturing every micro-expression, every slight shift in body language. Meghan's jaw was tight, her shoulders rigid as she struggled to maintain some semblance of composure in the face of George's relentless questioning. "We had to tell our story because lies were being told about us," she said through gritted teeth. "We had to set the record straight because the palace was allowing false narratives to flourish while refusing to defend us when we were being attacked unfairly." "Set the record straight," George's eyebrows rose. "Or create a new record that better served your purposes. Because I've noticed something interesting about your storytelling, Meghan. The details seem to change depending on the audience and the context. The story evolves. New elements get added. Old elements get quietly dropped. That's not setting the record straight. That's narrative management." The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Meghan's hands were now visibly shaking, her breathing slightly labored as she realized that this interview had become something entirely different from what she had expected. George, sensing her vulnerability, wasn't about to let up. "Let me ask you something else, Meghan," George continued, his voice now carrying the full authority of decades in journalism. "You've built your post-royal brand on authenticity, on truth-telling, on being a voice for the voiceless. But I have to wonder, how authentic can someone be when their story keeps changing? How much truth-telling is actually happening when key details are omitted or altered depending on what serves your narrative best?" Meghan's face was flushed now, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the stress and anger radiating from every pore. "My story hasn't changed, George. What's changed is my willingness to protect people who never protected me." "What's changed?" Is my understanding that staying silent to preserve someone else's reputation while my own was being destroyed was a mistake? So now we're getting to the heart of it, George said, leaning forward with the intensity of a prosecutor making his closing argument. This isn't about truth. This isn't about healing. This isn't about moving forward. This is about revenge. This is about making sure that if you were going to suffer, everyone else was going to suffer too. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Meghan's mouth fell open, her eyes widening with a mixture of shock and fury that was impossible to hide. Revenge? You think this is about revenge? You think I put myself through years of public scrutiny, criticism, and hatred for revenge? I think you put yourself through years of public scrutiny because it was profitable, George shot back without hesitation. I think you discovered that being a victim, being wronged, being the underdog fighting against the powerful institution, that story sells. It sells books, it sells Netflix shows, it sells speaking engagements, and it sells sympathy. And the more dramatic the story, the more it sells. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent studio. I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination. You invited me here under false pretenses, pretending this was going to be a normal interview when clearly you had an agenda from the moment I walked in. George remained seated, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to her agitation. One invited you here to have an honest conversation, something that seems to be in short supply whenever you're involved. Sit down, Meghan. We're not finished. Oh, we're finished, she replied. But something in George's tone, some note of authority that brooked no argument, made her hesitate. The power dynamics in the room had shifted completely. This was no longer a celebrity puff piece. This was a reckoning. Sit down, George repeated, his voice quieter, but somehow more commanding. Because I have one more question, and I think our viewers deserve an answer. Meghan remained standing for a moment longer, her internal struggle playing out across her face as she weighed her options. Finally, reluctantly, she sank back into her chair, but her posture remained rigid, defensive. Here's what I want to know, George said, his voice now carrying a tone of finality. If everything you've said is true, if you were really as mistreated, as silenced, as discriminated against as you claim, why didn't you document any of it? Why are there no emails, no recordings, no contemporaneous notes, no witnesses willing to go on record in an institution with hundreds of employees, countless interactions, endless protocols and procedures? How is it possible that your experiences of systematic mistreatment left no paper trail whatsoever? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, realization, panic, as she understood the trap she had walked into. This wasn't just about inconsistencies in her story anymore. This was about the fundamental credibility of her entire narrative. That's not how these things work, she stammered, her media training finally abandoning her completely. These conversations, these incidents, they happen in private. People don't record everything. They don't take notes on every microaggression, every moment of exclusion. But they do take notes on policy decisions, George pressed. They do keep records of official guidance. They document formal requests and responses. You're telling me you asked for mental health support and were officially denied, but there's no record of that request or that denial anywhere in the palace files. You're telling me there were official concerns raised about your child's skin color, but no one wrote down what was discussed or decided. Meghan's hands were shaking visibly now, her voice becoming smaller, less confident. You're trying to turn this into some kind of legal proceeding when these were personal family matters. Not everything happens through official channels, family matters. George's voice rose for the first time during the interview. Meghan, you made these allegations on television to millions of people. You accused the royal family of racism, of neglect, of institutional cruelty. You can't claim these were private family matters when you chose to make them public accusations. And when you make public accusations of that magnitude, the public has a right to expect proof. The studio was dead silent, except for the hum of cameras and lighting equipment. Every person present seemed to understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. A complete dismantling of a carefully constructed public persona. I have proof, Meghan said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction. I have my lived experience. I have my truth. George shook his head slowly, almost sadly. Your lived experience isn't proof, Meghan. Your truth isn't the same as the truth. And what we've seen here today, what our viewers have witnessed, is someone who has built a career on victimhood, who has monetized pain and suffering both real and imagined, and who has been willing to destroy relationships, reputations, and institutions to maintain that profitable narrative. Meghan looked directly into the camera for the first time since the questioning had intensified. Her eyes desperate, pleading, "That's not who I am. That's not what this is about. I never wanted any of this to happen, but it did happen," replied with finality. "And you made sure it happened very publicly, very dramatically, and very profitably. The question now is whether the American public, whether people around the world are going to continue to buy what you're selling, or whether they're going to start asking the same questions I've asked here today." As the interview concluded, the cameras captured one final image. Meghan sitting in stunned silence, her composure completely shattered. While George Stephanopoulos looked directly into the camera with the satisfaction of a journalist who had done exactly what journalism is supposed to do: hold the powerful accountable, no matter how sympathetic their story might appear on the surface. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had become something entirely different. A masterclass in tough questioning that left viewers across the nation talking, debating, and questioning everything they thought they knew about one of the most famous women in the world. What did you think of this intense confrontation? Do you believe George Stephanopoulos crossed a line? Or was this exactly the kind of tough journalism we need more of? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to Shoaib Buzzer Stories channel, because we're going to be breaking down every moment of this incredible interview in our next video. What other celebrities do you think need to face this level of scrutiny?